Episode 8, Burnout, Mind Tricks, and Rights versus Infringements.
You're listening to Guns Guide to Liberals, the podcast where we explore ideas and techniques that help you break down partisan barriers, build rapport across the aisle, and make a more persuasive case for the Second Amendment. I'm John Houtman.
And I'm Sarah Cade. In this episode, we're going to talk a little more about burnout, and John's bad argument of the day is about how both sides talk past each other on rights versus infringements. But first, John, how's your week going?
Good, we're getting geared up for SHOT Show over here, which is a reminder that next week we'll have no episode because we will be headed to Las Vegas.
This is correct. We are going to skip a week of content, so enjoy your vacation from us. So one thing we want to start to do with this podcast is include more examples and more case studies, because a lot of the topics we're talking about are complicated, and sometimes it's hard to imagine what these skills actually look like when you're practicing in real life. So we're going to go over some case studies of things we've seen or things we've heard out in the wild, and we'll do it in kind of a storytelling format, and we'll take a look at what went well and what we can learn from each interaction. This week, we've got a listener story from Shelley Walters, who runs Females with Firearms on Facebook. And this is a great example of identifying values and appealing to values. This is from a Facebook discussion, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it a little just to save time. But it's a response to the classic question that everyone in the gun world has heard. I don't see why anyone needs an AR-15.
Shelley replied that ARs are easy to learn, accurate to shoot, comfortable to handle, and endlessly modifiable, and that they make an excellent home defense weapon, particularly for women.
In reply, the person said he just doesn't see why the average Joe needs an AR-15, except to live out some backyard Rambo fantasy. He said women should just use a shotgun. Shelley's response was excellent. Instead of flying off the handle over the backyard Rambo insult, the first thing she did was notice that his response indicated that he thought home defense was valid. He might not understand her choice of weapon, but by saying they should just use a shotgun for home defense, the unspoken message is that he believes people have a right to defend their homes.
That's a point of common ground. Shelley took that basic agreement one step further. She added the emotional component of family and presented her core values in a positive and inspirational context.
As we read her response, notice a couple of things. She didn't act like he was wrong. She didn't try to score a win. She validated. She made him feel like he was right to think that way. And then she provided some additional information from her perspective in a non-judgmental way. This is a great example of how to reduce defensive bias and make progress in the culture war. We need more of this.
Shelley said, shotguns are fine home defense for some people. Many love them and handle them very well. I have friends who can do some freaking awesome shooting with them. But you were specifically speaking of the average Joe. As an average Jane, I was replying. Generally speaking, shotguns are bigger, heavier, more cumbersome, have much greater recoil, and way less capacity than the AR-15. Why intentionally choose something less manageable when I can choose something that I can better control? I'd much rather have pinpoint accuracy than a wider spread. Many women are considering how to defend a home with small children in it. Damage control is top priority. Collaterals are not merely my door frame or bedside lamp. She concluded the discussion by introducing another positive value: tolerance. She appealed to the notion that everyone is different, and that we shouldn't restrict other people's choices based on our own preferences.
This is a great example of how to present new information to someone in a way they can actually hear and take to heart. It humanizes our side of the debate. Great job on that, Shelley. Thank you. In soft skills, we'll talk about specific, actionable techniques to help you become a more persuasive communicator.
What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
This week we're going to talk about Burnout Part 2, the mind tricks. Getting over burnout is a learning process. This will take practice, but luckily it's stuff you can practice anytime, anywhere, for a few minutes a day. We're going to work on increasing your resilience to negativity with a 3-step process. We'll do an awareness exercise first to help recognize trouble spots. Next, we'll cover reframing, because that's an effective way to influence your emotional state. The last step is to change your self-talk from a narrative of helplessness to a narrative of effectiveness. The reason it's last is because without the foundation steps, you're more likely to try to use willpower to control your thoughts, which is unsustainable and harmful in the long run.
Sounds like that's what's wrong with a lot of well-meaning advice, like just toughen up and grow a thicker skin.
Right, that advice is totally off the mark. Fighting burnout isn't a matter of strength, it's a matter of skill. Not all of us learn healthy coping skills from our families as children. Some of us learn these skills only as adults, after a lot of painful experience and dedicated study. These techniques are borrowed from cognitive behavioral therapy. These are my own adaptations, drawn heavily from a variety of sources that have worked for me over the years.
This stuff will help, but if burnout is a serious problem for you, the best thing you can do is find a cognitive behavioral therapist in your area.
There's a lot more to this topic than we can possibly cover in this podcast, so consider this more of a jumping-off point for further study rather than a treatment guide. We're not subject matter experts on psychology. We're just nerds with microphones.
This segment is going to take the same skills you've already learned in previous episodes, but this time you're going to apply them to yourself instead of other people.
We're going to use the attitude reorienting skills from episode 2, the reframing skills from episode 4, and the tactical listening exercise from episode 5. Feel free to pause here if you need to refresh your memory. We're going to start with the tactical listening skill, because the root of that is actually a mindfulness technique, and it'll be the foundation for the rest of the anti-burnout skills we're going to learn next.
Tactical listening was that 1-minute mindfulness exercise from episode 5. In that, you chose a part of your body to focus on, like the breath in your nostrils, and you sat with quiet awareness of that part for 1 minute. Every time your thoughts started to intrude, you simply refocused on the quiet awareness of the breath in your nostrils. If you practiced it, you know that at first it was difficult, but over time, it became easier to quiet your mind and direct your awareness. With practice, you could redirect your awareness on the fly in seconds.
So for tactical listening, you used your body focus to bring your mind back to the present moment. This time we're going to take that exact same skill, the directed awareness, and we're going to flip it around and apply it to your inner narrative and your emotions.
Imagine your awareness as a flashlight in a dark room. You can shine it in one direction or another, illuminating different parts of the room. Last time you shined it on your body. This time you're going to shine it on your inner narrative and your self-talk. That's what we mean by directed awareness.
I don't recommend setting a timer for this exercise, but it doesn't have to take all day. What you're going to do is redirect your awareness from your body to your inner narrative. The goal is to practice directing your awareness where you want it. So we're going to start the exercise with basic body awareness. Even if that's still not exactly easy for you yet, you should notice some improvement from when you first started practicing. Focus on your breath in your nostrils, or whatever focal point you picked. This time, when your mind starts to wander, simply observe it. Observe your thoughts, observe your inner narrative, observe your feelings. Don't judge, just let it be. Feelings especially are not to be judged. They're normal and natural in all their iterations. They don't make you a good or bad person, and they don't have to influence your actions.
Just like we practiced non-judgmental observation of our friends' thoughts in episode 2, we're going to extend the same courtesy to our own thoughts. We're going to observe our inner narratives and allow those observations to lead us to greater understanding. You don't need to stop yourself from having negative thoughts by any means. Have them, but treat them like a leaf floating on a stream passing by. That's what works for me.
If strong emotions come up during this exercise, that's totally okay. Observe those too. Remember the pause and reorient skills from episode 2, where you changed your attitude to one of detached curiosity by imagining yourself as a scientist observing an interesting phenomenon. If you're a visual person, you can imagine looking through a magnifying glass. If you're an auditory person, you can try narrating yourself observing your self-talk.
Huh. Now I'm thinking about that argument I had with my brother. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How interesting. When I direct my awareness towards my body, I notice a lot of tension in my shoulders. And when I direct my awareness towards my feelings, I notice I'm feeling anxious.
Notice how when you observe your emotions without judging them, it gives you a little bit of distance from them? That distance and objectivity can be helpful in preventing burnout. Rather than trying to avoid or suppress negative thoughts and feelings, you can simply allow yourself to feel them while you periodically take a step back and observe what's happening and how it affects you.
Be mindful about this. You don't want to use distancing as an escape or avoidance, but it can be very helpful when used as a part of a more comprehensive coping strategy. We'll get into that in a minute.
At first, this exercise will be difficult. As you go along, practice deliberately directing your awareness in different directions. Focus on your body, then your feelings, then your thoughts and your inner narrative, then your body again. Practice moving between feeling your feelings and observing yourself. It's possible to go back and forth, and that kind of control will come in handy the next time you can't keep your mind off that dumb thing someone said, or that dumb thing you said that you now regret.
The first step towards breaking yourself out of a negative feedback loop is realizing you're in one. Directed awareness helps with that.
Over time, this skill gets easier, just like the body awareness did. Once you get good at it, you'll find a million opportunities to use it in your daily life.
Say you're in an internet argument. You might take a moment to direct your focus to your nostrils. As you shine your awareness flashlight around, you might notice that there is tension in your jaw. And when you shine the light on your feelings, you might notice you feel angry, like you've been wronged somehow. When you focus on your inner narrative, you might find it's telling you that this person is being willfully malicious and purposely misunderstanding you in order to make you look stupid.
Don't judge your feelings or your thoughts. They're just feelings and thoughts, not objective facts. They are one possible interpretation of events, and they may not be accurate. That's okay. That's how human beings are supposed to work.
While you can't change your feelings, you can influence your emotional state.
Next, we're going to use the exact same reframing skills we learned in episode 4 to reframe our own interpretations of events and change the tone of our inner narrative. This can be tough. If you're used to being negative, it almost feels good. It's satisfying because you expect negativity and your mind craves patterns, even negative ones. When you change to being positive, it's going to hurt and it's going to be difficult. This isn't an overnight process, so be understanding with yourself as you practice.
The technical term for this skill is cognitive reappraisal. It's exactly the same thing as the reframing skill we worked on in episode 4, only this time we're using it on ourselves.
Here's how it works. When an event happens, your brain comes up with a way to interpret it and fit it into your inner narrative. Usually this is unconscious and uncontrolled. For example, some dude cuts you off in traffic and he is just driving like an asshole. Screw that guy. He is a selfish, inattentive jerk who's trying to take advantage of you.
But what if his dog got hit by a car and is howling in pain in the back seat while he races to the vet to get help? What if he's crying so hard he didn't see you when he changed lanes?
Does that framework change your interpretation of the event? When you shine your flashlight on your emotions, do you feel a little less angry? A little less tension in your body? A little less likely to flip him off, cut in front of him, and slow down? That's cognitive reappraisal, and you can do that anytime you want, with anything. And the story doesn't even have to be true for it to work to reduce negative emotions.
Although it helps if it's plausible enough that you at least believe it for a split second.
You can play the what-if game anytime. You can practice in low-stakes environments first. Just like in episode 4, it sometimes takes a lot of self-discipline to reframe events in the most positive and charitable light. But science tells us this is one of the most effective strategies for managing stress and negative emotions. Instead of suppressing your negative feelings, you want to deliberately reframe your interpretation of the events. When you notice your self-talk getting negative, shine your flashlight on it. Observe it through your magnifying glass. Deliberately reframe it in a more positive light.
But what about the truth? You don't want to go around with an unrealistic Pollyanna view of the world, do you?
Cognitive reappraisal doesn't actually degrade your ability to tell fact from fiction. If you've ever watched a good movie, you know it's possible to be uplifted, inspired, and refreshed by a work of fiction, even though you're fully aware that it's fictional. Truth is not required to change your thought patterns. That said, cognitive reappraisals that are plausible and true are incredibly powerful. They can change your entire worldview for the better, not just your temporary emotional state. And they're especially helpful when you're trying to build long-term relationships.
You'll never know the truth about the guy who cut you off in traffic, but your beliefs and assumptions about your Aunt Sally really matter when you're trying to interact with her.
Maybe your aunt thinks you're stupid for owning guns. Or maybe she doesn't understand your values because her own bias prevents her from hearing opposing points of view. Maybe she spent her entire life feeling distant from the rest of the family over this issue, and this is an opportunity to help her repair that relationship and feel a true sense of belonging.
Your brain is going to interpret events that happen in your life no matter what. Why not steer that process in a way that improves your mental health?
To use cognitive reappraisal, you first need to be aware of your negative emotional response. Some things are obvious, like the traffic incident, but other things sneak up on you over time.
Like feeling hopeless and pessimistic about the gun debate.
Exactly. Sometimes you don't notice how things affect you until you take a moment to check in with yourself. If you're not sure exactly what's burning you out, try doing periodic check-ins. You might want to use certain activities as triggers. For example, you might want to decide that every time you check your social media, you're going to do 1 minute of directed awareness before you log in, and 1 minute of directed awareness after you put it away.
Or you might want to do 10 seconds of body awareness during every commercial break on your news channel. Or check in on your self-talk after each guest on your favorite talk show.
Do whatever works for you, but make time to practice every day. This skill can pay off in life-changing ways. The next skill we're going to work on is reforming your inner narrative. The goal here is to change your inner narrative from one of helplessness to one of effectiveness.
It's easy to get stuck in the feedback loop of negativity, and sometimes you can't see a way out of it.
The key to breaking free is to focus on solutions and action steps. Instead of dwelling on things that happen to you, you want to focus on things that you can do. Earlier, you used directive skills to bring your mind back to the present moment and to focus on your body or your feelings or your inner narrative. You can direct your focus. Your practice proves it. You'll use a similar skill now to focus your thoughts on solutions, even if they're small and indirect. Find something you can do, or an action you can take, or a tiny step you can make in the direction you want to go. It doesn't have to be directly related to the negative situation, but it can be. Every time you notice your thoughts returning to that negative situation, use your awareness skills to observe your feelings, use your reframing skills to reinterpret the situation, and use your focus skills to gently redirect your thoughts towards positive action steps. It works better if you spend some time on detailed visualizations of the positive things you can do. Here's an example.
That guy over there thinks we should melt down all the guns. Clearly, he's just an asshole. He probably wants to disarm everyone so he can enforce his sinister political agenda.
That's your initial interpretation, but it might not be accurate.
Hang on. Let me take a step back. Oh, look, my self-talk has created a narrative about this person I don't know. Huh. I feel tension in my gut. My thoughts keep coming back to him and his motives. That's interesting.
That's your directed awareness check-in.
Maybe this guy is afraid of guns because he was mugged, and it makes him feel scared and out of control, and he doesn't want anyone to have the power to hurt him like that ever again. I don't agree with his solutions, but I kind of feel for the guy.
That's your reframing.
Now I'll step back. What's the best thing for me to do in this circumstance? Maybe instead of dwelling on this guy, I'll let this energy motivate me to make time to finally take my sister-in-law to the range. I don't think it's worthwhile to spend energy on this random guy, but teaching her how to shoot will help me advance the Second Amendment cause in the long run.
And then, every time your thoughts return to dwell on that guy, use your flashlight to be aware of it. Use your magnifying glass to get some distance from the emotions, and use your reframing and focusing skills to gently guide your thoughts back to the productive thing you're going to do. Visualize in detail what the action steps might look like.
My sister-in-law is going to be so happy I finally made time for her. Maybe I'll bring some soda bottles to the range so she can see them explode and fizz when she hits them. She's really going to enjoy the success of hitting those targets.
With commitment and discipline, this difficult process will become easier over time. You'll reduce your burnout, and you'll enjoy increased feelings of productiveness, control, and efficacy.
This week's bad argument of the day is all about the tension between compromise and infringement. The current anti-gun framework is that the Second Amendment shouldn't be a right because it's unnecessary and has harmful consequences which get inflicted on society as a whole. The current pro-gun framework is
the Second Amendment is a right guaranteed by the Constitution and shall not be infringed.
But we fail to articulate why. Rights are a deep and complex idea. Shall not be infringed is something we skim off the top of this stew while leaving out a lot of important and convincing ingredients. What if regulating rights is the least beneficial and most dangerous way to mitigate harmful consequences? What if there's a better way? Proponents of gun control wonder why gun rights advocates are intractable and unwilling to compromise. No right is unlimited, since we can plainly see that the exercise of rights has both benefits and consequences. And those consequences might be borne by society at large or by third parties.
When the costs or consequences of behaviors are felt by a third party, economists call that an externality.
Compromising on the issue of rights versus externalities seems logical if it's perceived that the externalities stem from the exercise of the rights. There's clear evidence of limitation and compromise in how we exercise any right, so why not this one too? Gun rights advocates view these limitations and compromises as profound infringements and question the effectiveness of limitations on rights in general. The limitations on other rights not only appear to be the result of how we've organically negotiated these rights over time, but the potential consequences of these negotiated limitations are still very much up in the air. It is yet to be revealed as to whether or not we've conceptualized these rights as sufficiently absolute.
The extent of these rights is still controversial. Questions remain about whether or not speech is free enough or altogether too free, or if our phones are too encrypted or not encrypted enough.
Appealing to that negotiation as justification to restrict the rights to bear arms and to self-defense isn't yet substantiated, especially as we see how consequential variations in rights to privacy and free speech can be around the world.
And especially since none of these negotiations seem settled as we move into an uncertain future.
It's recognized that both the exercise of rights and the limitations of rights have major consequences. While there's debate about the balance of these externalities, consistent, principled evaluation tends to come down on the side of free speech, despite people saying horrible things. On privacy, despite warrants making it more difficult to prosecute criminals, and on just about any other issue, despite the fact that none of the outcomes or consequences are 100% pure and unadulterated good. And we can reference the long history of negative outcomes resulting from the restrictions on rights. Burdens are increased on the people who need to exercise those rights the most. Regulation, especially when it's implemented in predictably imperfect ways, is infringement, regardless of intention.
And this kind of ongoing regulation is the same as passing local laws which result in displacing Planned Parenthood and women's health providers.
All laws and regulations surrounding rights can be viewed as infringements, and, more than attempting to manage people's behavior, they lay traps and obstructions at the feet of those who'd otherwise engage with those rights in good faith. Even if it were theoretically possible to construct a compromise based on genuinely held views of common sense, if such a thing actually existed, such that the law would not ensnare good faith actors and generate unintended consequences, the necessary trust and social environment required to tinker with rights do not presently exist. Rights are a hard-won and precarious framework developed over millennia of human strife. Each and every right exists on a foundation of death, suffering, and waste, as people throughout history demonstrated with their lives and the agony of their experiences exactly how vital those rights are. Our moment-to-moment conditions may change, and evaluating the necessity or scope of any given right should not be an improvisation.
Just because something happened in a past that now seems foreign and unrecognizable doesn't mean it can't happen again in the future. The past doesn't always remain in the past, and there's no evidence that we're immune from repeating any variety of mistakes.
The tenuousness of our current state is assumed in how we conceptualize rights as sacrosanct and inviolable. Our firmness about them plays an active and vital role in maintaining every millimeter of human progress. It's always possible that humans carry with them an idea or a behavior which hinders our thriving, of course. That's evidenced clearly by our intellectual and moral history. And we certainly could be blind to exactly how that's manifest in our present moment, given our preferences, biases, and habits of culture. However, unlike countless previous generations, our world is radically different from our grandparents' world. Change happens faster. The future towards which we're accelerating is uncertain, and the sense of urgency is increased as well, as we imagine global catastrophe racing neck and neck with the hopeful potential for previously unprecedented human flourishing. Our anxiety, the sense of urgency, the number of variables, our limited view, and the speed of transformation does not provide us an even remotely sterile enough laboratory in which to experiment responsibly with infringing rights, even if we were in agreement on exactly what to do. It's like trying to balance the wheels on a moving car while they're spinning so fast that the wrong oscillation could tear the wheel to pieces before it's corrected.
So what you're saying is that we should do nothing? We can't wait to solve these problems, and we can't leave this unsolved. Not when everything is changing so quickly and when the stakes are increasing.
Of course not. But maybe the best intervention doesn't occur at the level of rights. Maybe that's the least effective and least judicious compromise. Maybe, given our circumstances and limitations, tinkering with the most delicate and the most consequential frameworks is the path of greatest resistance and fewest positive outcomes. The costs and consequences of addressing issues along vectors which don't seek to limit rights are far lower, more localized, and less likely to spiral out of control if the implementation is imperfect. It's also easier, faster, and more collaborative to execute these strategies. And that's crucial to appeasing our sense of urgency. If we're looking down the barrel of a utopia or a dystopia, which could occur with equal likelihoods, solving problems by restricting rights in the moment isn't an easy sell or a guaranteed positive future outcome. If we can't guarantee a permanent fix, then we certainly shouldn't hamstring future generations. Proposing solutions that tinker with rights asks other people in our society to believe, on limited or non-existent evidence, that our proposals are beyond the accumulated and hard-won wisdom of the ages, upon which our entire culture is built.
People believe in these traditions with pride and inform their identities with these traditions. Calling them intractable and uncompromising when they're resistant to external pressures that undermine those traditions is the least effective way to generate social progress. But it's a great way to start a culture war.
The concern we all have about limiting rights is that the limitation of a right might lead directly to a circumstance which illustrates the necessity of a right. Our common worry is that curtailing free speech creates a negative environment in which reclaiming free speech is required to set things right again, for example.
We're concerned that, inevitably, those who attempt to speak out against censorship will be the first ones censored. Those whose speech would be vital to countering oppression would be the first ones oppressed.
This is the lesson of the history of rights. Rights, despite their externalities, guarantee a balance of power and the ability to responsibly maintain that balance. If the externalities become noticeably problematic, we should attempt to address the problem at the point where the right encounters the environment in which the problem occurs, not by curtailing the right itself.
Thanks for listening to Gun's Guide to Liberals.
We'll see you in 2 weeks after SHOT Show.
Focus on your breath and focus on your breath. Sounded like I was going to say underwear.
That underwear breath.
Okay.